Hey everybody, Tim here with today's episode of Enterprise, Season 2, Episode 22, The Cogenitor. It was a good episode, I'm not gonna lie. It was, this is probably, at least off the top of my head, the first, emotional type of episode that they had. At least that stands out to me, because a lot of these have been really bad. But that being said, it is a recycled plot line. So, and not nearly done to the same quality. And in fact, they kind of, pussy out the same way. So go back, watch the Next Generation episode Outcast. If you guys saw the review I did that one, I actually kind of cried a little bit in that review. Because that was an emotional episode. That was a difficult episode to get through, and it was very interesting. Where in that one, it's the race that we encounter is very androgynous. And in that one, of course, it's Riker who falls in love, but when I say they pussy out, they took the coward's way out, is what I mean. And because they casted a female in the role, supposedly Jonathan Frakes had asked them to cast a male, because that would have made it that much more interesting. But they didn't. They casted a female. In fact, I think females were the entire species. And then it kind of goes through about you need to embrace your humanity, or you need to embrace the more binary part of your body. And so on and so forth. You can watch that review. For this one, there is a supernova, or it's about to go supernova. It's going to take 100 years, maybe 2, which would put it right around the Next Generation, which I don't know if they did that on purpose with that shout out or what. But to Paul's hey, I might still be alive when this thing does it. Who knows? So I kind of like that. It was interesting. Andreas Katsulas, I think is how you say his name, makes his appearance. Probably the most famous character from Babylon 5. He plays Jakar. He was also a reoccurring Romulan in the Next Generation. He played Tamalak. So it was kind of cool, and he didn't wear nearly as much makeup from either of those roles, and you can actually kind of see him. So I liked that. His whole subplot, of flying into the star, and Archer's this is great, can I have one of these ships? And he's oh, I'm sure your Starfleet will make one soon enough. Again, a reference to the Next Generation, where Crusher, helps design that, and she flies into the star. So, again, a lot of Next Generation shoutouts in this episode. To continue it, at one point Trip is talking to the Cogenitor, and he's let's look up to see what movies we can watch. There's Dixon Hill and the Black Orchid, clearly a reference to Captain Picard's program. The Bride of Chaotica, which is actually a Voyager reference. And then the one they end up actually choosing was The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was directed by the same guy who did the Star Trek motion picture, the first movie. So lots of references, all fly. I don't know if this fell on an anniversary or something, but it was weird how many different references. Now, as far as the actual plot, there's a race that is very binary, it has men and women, and then there's this weird middle one. It's the third gender, and they use it for reproduction. They don't go into specifics. My guess would be that it's almost like a surrogate, because they don't want the female to be impregnated because it could do her harm or something like that. I'm just guessing, I'm projecting here. But then, so she's basically, or this thing is basically a living incubator. And so Trip is very confused by this and does all sorts of scans and realizes that this third gender is actually just as competent at learning and stuff like that as anybody else. And so he just wants to talk to it and save it. And then he even starts referring it as a she, as a female. Again, kind of projecting here. And so, again, I feel like they could have done the same thing as Outcast. I would have been more interested to see this character as a male and see if Trip is still interested in it, rather than a female. Because I think that would have put a different dynamic into it. Now, in Outcast, that episode is all about Riker falling for this individual. Whereas in this one, Trip doesn't seem to have any sort of romantic feelings. He's just about, you're treated terribly. Like, they don't talk to you, they just kind of put you in a corner and don't, like, you eat one time a day, you're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to read, you can't do anything. And he is more of trying to, like, educate and, like, give it a personality and, like, humanity, for lack of a better word. And I think that's really interesting, and I really liked it. But I still think it would have been interesting to see if you had completely redone this episode and put a male in that role instead of a female, just to kind of see how the dynamic with Trip would have changed. And then finally, this character even asks for asylum, saying, like, hey, can you help me? Can you save me? I want to learn how to do stuff. And Archer says no. Like, we got to remember, this is really early into Starfleet. This is before the Federation. And Archer says no, and the character actually ends up killing itself because it no longer wants to be that third gender. Like, it wants to be its own individual. And it's heartbreaking. And I don't know, like, I felt really weird towards the end where Trip says, like, this is my fault. And Archer's just like, you're goddamn right it is. And I was like, oh, like, Archer came off really strong. He could have said yes and allowed the individual to stay with the asylum. But he also said no, so it is partially his fault. So I feel like it was a weird kind of twist. I don't know if Archer was projecting or what that was about. But I did like this episode. I thought it was really interesting. A lot of the, like, remake episodes of Enterprise I have been completely against, but this one was really good. I actually really did enjoy this one. So for those who have seen it, did you think it was just a remake of Outcast? What would you have thought if the Cogenitor had been a male instead of a female actor? Go ahead, let me know, and I will see you guys next time for Regeneration.